Hello and welcome. This is DEQ's Verifier training for the Clean Fuels Program Quarterly Electricity Transactions Reporting. My name is Courtney Krebelsheimer, and I am a market analyst for the Clean Fuels Program. As a note before we get started, this training is not intended to replace or supersede anything in our program regulations, which are contained in Division 272 for third-party verification and in Division 253 for the Clean Fuels Program. If any information presented in these slides should conflict, the regulation always takes precedence. We'll begin today with a brief overview of quarterly electricity transactions reporting in the Clean Fuels Program, including how it differs from what you've already seen in verifying quarterly liquid fuel transactions. We'll go over the reporting requirements, fuel pathway codes that are applicable in electricity reporting, common and uncommon fuel applications in Oregon, some considerations about verifying this transaction type, and a few possible scenarios you may encounter. We'll end, as usual, with resources that can help you through the verification process and our contact information. First, let's go over some basics of electricity transactions reporting. The reporting process begins with the registration of fuel supply equipment, which we'll refer to here as FSEs. In order to prevent multiple parties reporting for the same chargers and to ensure the chargers are operational, electricity reporting entities must register them through our FSE registration process. In that process, DEQ staff review the submitted materials to determine if the registering entity is an eligible credit generator for the equipment and that it is active and operational before being given an FSE ID. During the FSE registration process, we also handle less common metering setups. We'll get into this more in future slides, but in some cases a meter on a panel or circuit is allowed to be used for reporting electricity charging from multiple chargers connected to that panel or circuit. This is usually done with so-called dumb chargers that do not have a network connection, or in some cases, such as underground parking garages where networking the chargers is difficult. It's important to know that each FSE ID is unique to the hardware serial number of the charger that is registered. In cases where a charger is replaced, the reporting entity is responsible for informing DEQ of the swap and registering the new charger. In comparison to liquid fuel transactions reporting for CFP, the fuel amounts being reported per FSE are most similar to compressed natural gas or renewable natural gas transactions. However, some critical differences exist for this sector. First, metering will generally be internal to a particular device, and those meters generally last the lifetime of the device and are not expected to be recalibrated. Secondly, some metering setups you encounter may be very complex. This is especially true for electric forklifts in warehouse settings. Electricity transactions reports also tend to have a lot more FSEs associated with them than other types of reporting, since there are more EV chargers than other types of FSEs. Electricity reporting can contain significantly more fuel applications than other types of reporting. And finally, you'll often be verifying an aggregator, which is a company that reports on behalf of many other companies. That increases the complexity because each company for which the aggregator reports may have a different data collection process. Here, we'll go over the actual data points DEQ requires for electricity reporting. The entity is required to include a date, fuel pathway code or FPC, the fuel amount in kilowatt hours, the transaction type, which will always be listed as EV charging, the fuel application type or types, whether the transaction is being reported through an aggregator, and the ID associated with the FSE. Note that when looking at the reported fuel amounts, many reporters will report the FSE's total charging over a quarter, while others will report the individual charging events. Next, we'll go over some of the common fuel pathway codes for electricity transactions reporting and what you can look for as a verifier when reviewing them. The next couple of slides cover common fuel pathway codes and are organized to display the code, a description of what is included in this code, what checks to perform, and possible evidence to review as a verifier. The first starts with ORELC and ends with the current year. This code describes the statewide electricity mix. Since this mix is generally always available, there are no additional checks the verifier needs to do for this code. The next common code also begins with ORELC XXX, where the XXX represents the code for a specific utility, or FRC for the set of utilities that have the same carbon intensity because they are full requirements customers of the Bonneville Power Administration, meaning all their electricity is supplied by the Federal Hydropower Administration. This code always ends in 2 digits, which represent the current year. The biggest thing to check for with this code is whether or not the EV chargers reported are actually in the surface area of the specified utility. Instructions for how to do this appear on slide 27. Next are the utility renewable energy products. These are products offered by the state's large utilities that they certify through the Clean Fuels Program for use with both their own residential EV credit generation and for their business customers whose chargers are covered by those products. With these types of pathways, it is important to determine whether electricity usage is covered by these agreements. To do this, the verifier should request to see the monthly bills associated with the chargers, which would generally cover an address or a panel that these chargers are on, or the annual agreements with the utilities themselves. Next are our off-site renewable electricity fuel pathway codes, with the first one being the fuel pathway code beginning with ORREC. The last 4 digits of this code will indicate the current year, and the code represents renewable electricity that is deemed to have a carbon intensity of 0. This is basically always solar and wind electricity generation. When verifying a renewable electricity pathway, check to make sure the entity has submitted supplemental information with its quarterly report. This supplemental information must contain the Regis REC retirement reports, which cover at least the quantity of electricity reported. Finally, there are the producer-specific renewable electricity pathways. Pathway codes will vary for these with each producer and occasionally with each feedstock being used for electricity generation, but the verifier should confirm that the renewable electricity producer for the FPC matches the renewable electricity generator for the RECs submitted with the quarterly report. Now we will talk through the types of fuel applications you can expect to encounter in Oregon. Electricity reporting does contain more fuel applications than any other fuel type reported to CFP. This is because there is a large diversity of energy economy ratios that apply for electric vehicles. An energy economy ratio captures the difference in efficiency between internal combustion engines and electric ones, and is part of the credit calculation. It both divides the fuel carbon intensity and multiplies the energy dispensed to give credit for the more efficient motor. This means that if the reporting entity chooses the wrong fuel application, they run the risk of generating illegitimate credits. You should always look to review the evidence of a fuel application, particularly if the application is not a common one. The light-duty battery electric vehicle / plug-in hybrid vehicle fuel application is common and is the default for on-road EV chargers. It describes charging for electric vehicles that are either all battery electric or plug-in hybrid electric. For anyone who reports a different fuel application, ask for evidence which substantiates that the vehicles were charged. Some common situations in which this applies include school districts that operate electric buses and companies that own chargers for their electric truck fleets. We won't go over every possible fuel application in detail, but here's a slide describing which applications tend to be common and uncommon in reporting. The uncommon ones are those where either it should be obvious why the organization is reporting for that fuel application, for example, a transit agency reporting light rail, streetcars, or buses, or should be able to provide some more evidence for why they selected that fuel application. Now, let's get into some of the broader important considerations for verification. All regulated entities that are subject to third-party verification are required to maintain a GHG emissions monitoring plan. The requirements for monitoring plans for CFP entities are contained in Division 253, Rule 600, Subpart 9. Since we do have a number of reporters who are also in California's low carbon fuel standard, we will note here that while they may have a monitoring plan that covers both their California and Oregon reporting, the monitoring plan must be specific enough that it is clear how the Oregon reporting is determined and supported. Oregon also allows aggregators to report on behalf of multiple reporting entities. In such cases, the verification plan should include a list of entities the aggregator is reporting on behalf of, what fuel types they report, and how the data is collected by each individual reporting entity. According to Division 253, aggregators need to include this information in their monitoring plans as well. The purpose of such a list is to help the verification team understand the contributions made to the aggregator's reporting from various sources and plan their risk assessment and sampling approach. As the number of EV chargers statewide precludes site visits to every potential location, DEQ requires a robust and well-informed approach to risk assessment and sampling. There is inherent risk in the fact that EV chargers are numerous and distributed, especially when considering aggregated reporting of these FSEs. Verifiers also need to consider risks associated with operational controls, like staff training, internal policies, data management systems, and other aspects of a company's approach to data collection and management that might pose risk. As review, DEQ requires that verification reaches a reasonable level of assurance. This means that the verification body has seen and reviewed enough relevant data to conclude that the overall data is unlikely to include error or misstatement. This standard may be more difficult to reach than with liquid fuel verifications, simply due to the number of locations involved. Please plan for risk assessment and sampling appropriately. Most companies that report EV chargers use a digital and networked system to collect data from their charging networks. So many of these companies use reports that are available from electric vehicle supply equipment service providers like ChargePoint or Blink when assembling their reporting for DEQ. If you will be performing a verification for an aggregator, you may find it challenging to plan for site visits and determine where they should be performed, as aggregators report on behalf of a number of different entities, and their data management and reporting systems may vary based on the location and charging type. There is a bit of guidance around this in Division 272, our third-party verification regulation. According to the rule, the verifier must make at least one site visit to the location where the aggregator's records are stored. Additional site visits may be necessary, but these are to be performed at the verifier's discretion, following the requirements for sampling outlined in the section on sampling plans in Division 272. What this means practically is that the verifier should use professional judgment to determine if additional visits will be needed based on the risk assessment and sampling plan it puts together. Keep in mind that as long as there is at least one in-person site visit as required by the regulation, any additional visits, including remote visits, are acceptable and encouraged if the verifier deems them necessary to reach reasonable assurance. When putting together a sampling plan and when planning site visits, the verification team should consider the number and location of charging sites, as well as the operational controls, data collection, and management procedures at each site. Now we'll discuss some verification tips and scenarios. Starting with some common reporting issues for electricity reporting. If you are verifying reporting for utility renewable electricity products, you will need to look up the addresses for the chargers by checking the registered FSE tab for the organization in the Oregon Fuels Reporting System. You can then use the Oregon Department of Energy's lookup tool to determine whether the address is within the utility's service territory. Because electric meters are internal to their devices, they are not easily able to be recalibrated like some other meter types. This means it will be harder to determine whether a meter has become inaccurate, leading to misreporting. You are likely to encounter situations where a single meter over a circuit or panel with one or more chargers is used. If this is the case, the verifier needs to confirm with the entity either that there are no other sources of electrical load using that circuit or panel, or that they are otherwise accounting for those non-charging loads. The next few slides cover some important details about electric forklifts. Several years ago, DEQ required that all forklift reporting be based on actual metered data for how much electricity goes into forklifts. That has required fleet owners and operators to find ways to meter the data. Given that many forklift chargers do not have onboard metering, DEQ has approved a number of different metering methods for forklift fleets that we will review here. The monitoring plan should contain details about the metering setup at each site that a reporting entity has registered with DEQ. What we see most commonly for forklift reporting is that a meter has been installed on a circuit or electrical panel, though sometimes the receptacle on the wall has a metering device attached. When circuit and panel meters are used, the reporting entity is responsible for ensuring that only qualifying electricity usage is reported, either through the use of multiple meters to net out electricity usage that does not qualify for the program, such as lighting or other machinery, or taking other measures to ensure that only forklift chargers are hooked up to those circuits and panels. We also see cases where aftermarket metering is added to a charger or a charging cable. In this case, the charger is registered as the FSE, and we would expect the reporting to match the meter's readout for each individual charger. In some cases, the forklifts will have their own metering, and the forklift is registered as the FSE. In those cases, we would expect only one fuel application to be used, since the forklift will either be a pre- or post-2016 unit, and the data from the forklift should match the reported amounts. Rental forklift fleets are tricky in our reporting because forklifts are commonly rented by warehouses and other forklift fleet operators, and there is a significant risk of double counting of forklift charging by the rental forklift owner and the forklift operator. While most of the time you likely won't be verifying an aggregator that has both the rental forklift fleet owner and forklift operator as clients, you should make sure that any reporting on a rental forklift fleet has taken some measures to ensure that double counting does not occur. We'll wrap up today with a list of resources used throughout this presentation and how to contact us if you have questions. Here are some resources available to you as a verifier. If you have questions related to quarterly electricity transactions reporting, you can contact the rest of the reporting team and me at Oregon Clean Fuels at deq.oregon.gov. If you have questions related to third-party verification, please reach out to Liz Hardy at 3pverify@deq.oregon.gov. Thank you for attending.